I have clearly neglected the roots of my hair as much as I have neglected this YouTube channel. Hello, friendos! It's been a while. It's a fun time for K-pop this month. BTS was on SNL last night, Blackpink's in Coachella, Epic High's touring North America. SHINee's Mino enlisted in the Marines today. I hear Super Junior D&E released a new album. Big Bang's been doing really well lately. So I've been meaning to talk about this whole BTS thing for quite some time. I actually have a blog post that's been sitting in my drafts of my equally as neglected blog for the past 2 years, and I started that post I think when BTS first performed at the VMAs. That blog post has been untouched since then. And I don't know whether it's just a matter of like procrastination or just me not being able to really parse out what I feel about this whole like BTS American invasion thing. Before I incur the premature wrath of any like BTS fans, I should preface that in the absence of any cohesive thoughts about BTS and what they've done in the US, my overall impression is that it's really cool that a K-pop group has finally made it into the mainstream of American media. So for context, I became a K-pop fan right during the era where K-pop acts were just starting to come into the US. 2009 was the year where the Wonder Girls were touring with the Jonas Brothers, and a couple years after that, Girls' Generation, SNSD, had their whole American debut. And then a couple years after that, the Wonder Girls had this movie and all of this, and then Psy, Gangnam Style came out in 2012, and JYJ had a collab with Kanye West somewhere around the mix too. And I remember thinking during that time, I was in high school, and literally no one around me knew what K-pop was, and many people were like, Korea makes pop music? Dark times. And I remember thinking at that time that maybe it was too much to ask for K-pop to be as mainstream as it was during that time in China or Southeast Asia, or Japan even. And now we're living in an age where BTS is the Naruto of K-pop. And for anyone who's ever been the teensy bit invested in, Asian representation in media or Asian music or Asian pop culture, for it to make these strides and gain this much popularity in a market that, is usually pretty hostile to foreign acts, I think is a win for everyone. And on top of that, I also watched BTS's performance on SNL last night 4 times. It was really good. So that being said though, I'm jumping in this video not really sure what incisive commentary I have to make about BTS, and the fact that I actually know very, very little about BTS really doesn't help. I still don't know the names of the members off the top of my head. The greatest irony of this being that I'm wearing a Super Junior t-shirt right now. So fun fact, I used to write for a K-pop website called Soul Beats, and the site was mostly focused on long form pieces that kind of picked apart the socio-political, socio-cultural perspective on K-pop. Coming out of being a K-pop fan during a time where so many K-pop acts were so focused on being intentional on entering the US market and failing, it feels almost dismissive to not acknowledge BTS or try to think about why BTS worked and these other groups didn't. Based on what I know about BTS, which is very little, there wasn't there didn't really seem to be this very intentional push for BTS to become a Western artist in the same way that the Wonder Girls were marketed or SNSD was marketed. Or if you look towards Japan, the way that Dongbangsingi was, really intentional about entering the Japanese market. And that none of that really seemed to happen with BTS, right? And so I was really kind of confused as to how this K-pop group from a relatively unknown company with very little financial backing in comparison to your YG or SM or JYP, how they managed to end up selling out stadiums in the US. So a K-pop noob, right? I Googled why is BTS so popular and came up with all these think pieces on BTS's foray into the US market. And largely they tended to say the same thing. BTS's success in the US could be attributed to their fans, and how they engage with their fans through social media, their just sheer talent and ability to sing and dance and write music and all of that, as well as their authenticity. And the first two obviously I think are nothing new when it comes to K-pop. I remember even as early as 2009, the way that you would justify K-pop to all your friends who would judge you was that K-pop music was actually not that good, but the reason you got into it was because of the funny variety shows and the personalities. And secondly, artistry and dance and vocals and this very tight professionalism when it comes to performance in particular, that's been a mainstay in K-pop forever. So neither of those two things really struck me as being like, very unique to BTS. But the third thing, and I think most BTS fans would agree with this, is that their authenticity and their awareness of social issues and like the profundity of their lyrics and social commentary and whatever it is they do has really put BTS in a different place than like what other K-pop artists tend to do. And the thing is though, I totally get it. I mean, if this were 5 years ago and I was still as much into K-pop as I was back then, I think that I would totally like 3,000,000% be on board with BTS's whole shtick. I mean, authenticity is like cool, right? like it's cool to like be real and talk about things that matter. I mean, yeah, good for you. But as I was reading these articles, like the same verbiage kept coming up, right? These articles kept saying things like, unlike their K-pop peers, or, in contrast to typical standards in the Korean entertainment industry, blah, blah, blah. There was a sense that like BTS being this like, very genuine and unique and authentic sort of group was totally different from the rest of K-pop, which is in contrast, like, produced and polished and glossy and kind of fake. And that's something I kind of take issue with. It plays off of what I think is actually a very old and kind of tired trope of like Asian products in general being seen as like fake or inauthentic or shallow, or just a copy of like its superior, more authentic, more down to earth, oftentimes Western counterpart. And it's almost as if the idea is like, oh, other K-pop is fake and not real, but BTS is the real deal. And I think to a certain extent the comparison is somewhat warranted, because truth be told, K-pop historically has been built on this trainee system, right? You audition young kids, bring them in when they're like, 10, 11 years old, and then you like teach them how to dance and sing and act and, all this stuff so that they can have a career as a musician, as an entertainer for, later on in life. But keep in mind though that like BTS was no exception to this system. There was a company that like, found these kids and put them together in a group and like marketed them, and they started out like every other K-pop group, right? But anyway, I take issue with the idea that the other K-pop groups that maybe have been around for longer and are being contrasted with BTS as being not as authentic or not as like, socially conscious, are therefore less legitimate or less acceptable to Western audiences because they play into pre-existing Asian stereotypes of Asians being, robotic or produced or inauthentic or like not as naturally talented. I mean, I think what's important to remember is that everyone who is involved in the K-pop industry, like everyone who is a creative, whether they be, an artist or like a producer or a composer, a musician, or even like a stylist, right? They're in it, they do this for a career because they love and appreciate the art to some extent, right? And it just comes down to like whether or not you're able to practice that art in the systems that already exist. And the thing is, up until recently, K-pop and the Western market were not compatible at all. And so therefore the Western idea of music or pop music having to be authentic and genuine was not in like the lexicon of how K-pop was being produced. K-pop was being produced at its largest scale for like Asian audiences, East Asian audiences. And East Asian audiences, and I'm making like a huge, generalization here, but the idea of professionalism and, being neat and put together matters much, much more than your individual personality, right? Or how entertaining or funny or, charming of an individual you are, or even how authentic or real or like emotional you are. That obviously has changed in the past, just a couple of years. But if you look again, as far back as, when groups, second gen groups like Dongbangsingi or SHINee or even like Big Bang, which I think at the time when they were debuted was such an anomaly because they were so wild and, out of control and just not as polished as these other groups. And yet we're still very much like packaged for mass market appeal. K-pop groups of that time had to practice restraint and not be as genuine, otherwise they wouldn't be accepted in the East Asian market. And they're needing to play by these rules are somehow mistaken by Western audiences as them intentionally wanting to be fake or polished. So I think there's a couple of ways you can feel about like how BTS has become successful due to their authenticity. On the one hand, it's just great that there is an Asian celebrity, an Asian K-pop boy band that is making a name for itself in the US, not just for being like this kitschy, weird, pink plastic, thing that Asian products are usually known for, right? Think Psy of 2012, or really, any sort of like Asian subcultural byproduct where Americans look at it and be like, oh, that's really cute, and like, also not something to be taken seriously. The fact that BTS is taken so seriously, which is really like my number one fear when BTS came into the US market, would they be seen as like a novelty or would they be taken seriously? The fact that it is the latter is really, really encouraging. And the fact that like, these guys could like go to the UN General Assembly and like make a speech about like, youth, mental health, welfare, whatever, like cool, right? A win for everyone. And the fact that it's like an Asian face doing it, like considering how much Asians in the US have been stereotyped as being like, emotionless or robotic or like not creative, blah, blah, blah. The fact that there is a group that is in the mainstream that flies in the face of all of that, really, really awesome. On the other hand, though, I kind of really hate the fact that like BTS's success has, maybe not so much anymore, but like at the very beginning was really driven by how it was a foil to all these other K-pop acts, as being this hyper authentic thing, as opposed to like these other inauthentic K-pop, acts. Authenticity being the reason why your group is better than another group, especially when it plays so easily into the hands of these like very tired Asian stereotypes of K-pop being, inauthentic and plastic and whatever. I don't know. I think that just does kind of it does a little bit of a disservice to those groups who had to really work hard to be acceptable and be palatable and packaged well enough. Had to hide who they were in their artistry and their authenticity in order to appeal to a market that was not yet ready at that time to accept the kind of authenticity that BTS brings to the table today. I think BTS fans have heard more than a couple of old school K-pop fans like me tell them, don't forget who paved the road that BTS is now walking on. And that's not really my intention, right? Like, I think, all of my oppas have, are either in the army or have come back from the army, and their careers are all in a place where it's like, I'm glad you're saving up for your child's college tuition. So I don't have much of a horse in this race anymore, but I do have a horse in the greater race of how like, Asians are represented in media, and I don't want to overstate like the importance that like Asian representation has in media. My views on this have changed a bit since I've gotten older, and I think that we as Asians put a little bit too much stake in trying to appear cool and using Asian representation in media to kind of help us with that. I mean, the fact that like a boy band is redefining Asian masculinity is like an awesome thing, but to be honest, it's not the thing that will make or break people's like life or death. There are lots of other racial justice oriented things that matter much, much more than whether or not a K-pop boy band adequately represents like Asian masculinity. But no matter how you're looking at it, I mean, it's just cool to see, right? The fact that like so many people who watch SNL saw a Korean artist, an Asian artist sing in Korean on primetime television, that's a far cry from 10 years ago when people were asking me, whether or not K-pop came from North Korea or South Korea. And so this, in combination with like, the encouraging fact that Gen Z teenagers are just much more woke and accepting than, generations past, I think it's just a really, really good thing overall. I mean, yeah, I'd love to live in a future where you just turn on the radio and you hear songs in a language that you don't speak and it's like a totally normal thing. Though to be honest, I feel like by the time we get to that point, like radios probably won't be as much a thing anymore. So anyway, like none of this is meant to take away from BTS's success and blah, blah, blah. Like, they're a hardworking crew of kids and they're, doing really good work and it's really impressive. And like, I'm glad they're around. But I also think it's a good opportunity to look back on how K-pop and the Western media world has intersected in the past, and how those ventures have failed and why exactly like BTS in particular seems to be succeeding. Honestly, like despite this whole like YouTube ramble of unorganized thoughts in the past 2 years, I'm still not really sure exactly what to make of how BTS's success came to be. Nor do I think a lot of like, commentators I've been following for the past couple of years, nor do I think they really know either. It's almost as if like, hey, this happened, like cool, know? Let's enjoy it for what it is, and so far I am enjoying it a lot, and I think, you know, it's a really good time for K-pop, and things, you know, looking back on 10 years have really changed a lot, and it's neat to see where it'll go in the future. So, by the way, so as to like prove my ignorance about like BTS in general, I went and bought this when I was in Taiwan, because I was like really excited about the fact that DNA was performed on like US television, and it turns out this isn't even an album that has DNA on it, but like it has, oh, it doesn't even say like the track names on it, like it has like Fake Love on it, which I think is another important song in the BTS discography. I'm actually really excited for the day where I'll see like, you know, K-pop albums being sold at my like local Target. I think that's already happening in some places. Like that's a reality that I never thought would happen in 2009. I remember like in 2009, you had to like wait like a month for shipping and pay exorbitant like, you know, customs fees in order to get an album from Korea, and now it's like you just pop over to like Amazon or like Target and you get these, or like, you know, in my day I had to go to Taiwan to buy all my albums and not pay shipping fees. Dark times, guys.